Hello everyone, Sandrak here. So in this video, I want to be telling you which artifacts you should keep and which artifacts you should just straight up dump into the either as the XP or dump into these three artifact trading for one artifact system. So with that said, let's get started. Before we get started, just want to say a few disclaimer. First of all, this is meant for anyone AR45 or plus. If you're below AR45, you should focus on the rest of the Ascension instead. So talents as well as character levels and weapon levels. You should not be focusing on artifacts at all. All you need to do is just get a set of 4-star artifacts that is good enough and just get by with it. And you should start farming for artifacts after you reach AR45. The second thing is that this is meant for players who are near the end game and who has enough resource to build artifacts and consistently look for better artifacts. If you're not someone with that, then it's basically recommended that you find a correct set of artifacts and go with that at the moment, and again focus on character levels and talent levels instead. So with that said, let's get started. I won't touch on the main stats of the artifacts because 90% of the DPS builds are the same, with crit, circlet, attack %, and then the corresponding elemental damage bonus for the goblet. Now, supports builds also vary all over the place depending on the situation. Certain characters prefer specific artifacts substats over others and things like that. So I won't be going over exactly the main stats. You need to look up what to do with each main stats. There should be a guide on every single Genshin character at this point with the correct main stats you should go for. This video is focusing on how to select the substats with a DPS build as an example. For all the substats currently in-game, in terms of a DPS build in general, the rarity is that crit rate is equal to crit damage, both of which are bigger than attack %, which is bigger than energy recharge, which is bigger than elemental mastery, which is bigger than flat attack. And the last two you want to look for is HP or HP %, or defense %. So the main reason crit is more needed and has a higher rarity than attack %, even though they both directly contribute to more damage, is because it's easier to gain attack than crit. Crit can only be obtained from if the character ascends with crit, damage or crit rate. For example, Diluc ascends with crit rate and Genshin ascends with critical damage. So that's one way to get it. The second way is artifacts. For artifacts, there are two ways to get it. Artifacts, generally speaking, the substats or the main stats, and on top are sometimes artifact sets. For example, the Berserker can increase crit rate, and then the 4-piece Blizzard Strayer can also increase crit rate under specific situations. So these are the ways to obtain extra crit. As for attack, it's way more easier because you can just put any character on double pyro team, and then boom, they gain a passive attack right away. And on top of that, anyone with Bennett gains even more attack. So it's much easier to gain attack than crit, which means this is why crit is more valued than attack on this. Now for the rest of the substats, ER or energy recharge is generally used to keep DPSs who have high energy costs, like Ayaka, who have a high energy cost and a huge bunch of their damage is in their Q. So for characters like Ayaka or Eula, energy recharge is crucial to keep the cycling of their Q going, which ensures that they damage at the higher end of their damage potential. EM, or Elemental Mastery, is used for any DPS who plays in a reaction heavy team. So for example, if you play Hu Tao with Xingqiu, then EM is good on her because she will be able to cause some vaporize anyways, and with that it deals additional damage. As for the rest, they all depend on the character. Generally speaking, you do not want HP or defense or HP % or defense % on any of your artifacts, but you'll end up rolling for them anyways. But a specific character can make use of them. For example, Albedo and Noelle can make use of defense over attack even, and Hu Tao and Zhongli prefers HP over attack. So specific characters have their own things. But as you see in the example, all 4 of these are not DPS. Generally speaking, DPS stacks on attack most of the time. However, there might be exceptions in the future, and there might even be exceptions in game right now, for example Hu Tao. So with that said, that depends on how the character stacks off, but most of the time the character stacks off attack. Even when healers, when they say they do stack off attack, that means instead of building crit, because you're not using healers to deal damage, you stack all on attack. But in general, everyone stacks off attack if not mentioned otherwise. Now let's talk about which artifacts to keep. Now we have to go over the substats, rarities, and stuff like that. Of course, it is all up to you personally, but this is just what I think is and what I go with depending on what I keep and what I get. So of course, this is again assuming a DPS build, so we're going with a crit circlet, attack percent sands, and a corresponding or physical or elemental damage bonus cup. So with this said, if it has both crits, it's a dead keep. Even if the other two substats are HP and defense, you should still keep it because after all, the game depends, you do not know what your artifact is going to roll into until you hit the plus 20 state of the artifact, which means that you can end up with 2 crit and two pretty bad other substats, but end up rolling better than having 2 crit, attack percent, and energy recharge. It all depends on the roll. So having 2 crit is good enough for you to give this a try already, so you should do that instead. So if it has both crit rate and crit damage, it's a dead keep. As long as you can level up to level 16, if at that point it all rolls into bad artifacts, then you can dump it. The other good thing is you can feed artifacts into artifacts. It's pretty easy. All you lose is 90% of the artifact's EXP. So for example, if you feed a level plus 16 artifact into a level plus 4 artifacts, all you lose is 10% of the EXP needed to bring that piece of artifacts to plus 16. It's not a lot. And considering that overall you're using artifacts to exchange for other artifacts in the artifact reroll system and things like that, it's a small loss, but it gives you a great more chance to achieve the substats you want. So you should be able to give this a try, and it will work out well sometimes. If it has only 1 crit, so if it has either crit rate or crit damage, and it has 4 substats, however, the caveat here is that at least 2 of the substats will have to be good ones. So you have to land on crit rate or crit damage, and on top you'll have to land on one between attack percent, energy recharge, and elemental mastery. You should keep it as a backup. I know these are generally tossed away by most people because the rule is double crit, so if you do not have double crit, toss. However, the thing is, especially with Sands and Goblet and Circlet, it's very hard to get double crit. So these ones, most of the time, if these rolls well, these will serve a better job for you than trying to get a double crit one and having everything rolling into defense in the end. Because the thing is, it is just likely for a double crit one to roll into defense than for one of these to roll into defense. But you tend to get way more frustrated when a double crit rolls into defense because double crits are way more rare than a single crit. So having these to try and see which ones you roll well and eventually get a double crit, and if the double crit rolls well, just replace it. If it doesn't, then this one is probably still better. The third one is Sands. For Sands, it's almost impossible in a lot of situations if you're under a specific time restraint, say 2 weeks to farm artifacts. It is almost impossible to get the perfect artifact. For that, I mean double crit and also one more useful substats. So it is okay to only use 1 crit even as a finished build for Sands, as long as, again, it has some other good substats and it rolls well into that crit. Moving on to Goblet. For Goblet, you're generally using it as the off piece, and on top of that, it is hard enough to get the correct main stats because there are 7 damage bonus in total between the 6 elements except Angel and physical damage bonus, and on top of that you have to deal with defense, attack, HP. So with all of that added together, it's hard enough to roll into the correct main stats, so just use the best one you have. And of course, if you're using it as the off piece, if you get a better one, you can just swap, so it doesn't matter, just use the best one you have in terms of Goblet. And as long as for 3 stars, as long as there is a possibility that the 4th stuff, if the 4th substats is useful, then the whole piece will become a useful piece and you should always keep. And of course, if you have enough resources, you should always level these to level 4 to see what is the last substat. Because for example, you could be ending up getting like defense percent, HP percent, and then the 4th one is crit rate, but you roll like 3 times into the crit rate one, and then kaboom, this artifact becomes very useful. So it could be situations like that occurring, so this is why you should always level this to level 4 to see if you should give it a try. But generally speaking, the disadvantage of 3 substats over 4 substats is that essentially you're wasting 1 substat. Because for the 4 substats, you already know what you're getting, so the first time it doesn't give you an additional substat, instead it upgrades 1 more substat. So overall, you're looking at 1 less upgrade worth of substats when looking at 3 substats artifacts instead of 4 substats artifacts. So with this said, for the final effects section, I will be giving you the specific amount of substats, like good substats you should be looking for each different artifacts, and finally I'll give you the amount of rows you should be looking for each artifact. Now of course, again, this is personal idea. Do not feel restrained by this. If you're a beginner, if you're someone who doesn't have a huge artifact collection like all of us 1.0 players, then it is perfectly fine to use what's called transitional artifacts. They can also be very good. It's just overall, you should, when you have time, come back to building artifacts and make sure you have a finished one, because artifact is the most painful one to build, but a finished artifact piece will give you the most amount in terms of damage boost compared to all the other ones, which are like character levels, talent levels, weapons. It'll give you the most amount of reward when you build it correctly, which is why you should always come back and finish the builds. So with that said, let's get started for the 4 pieces. For feathers and flowers, because the main stats is already nailed down to be HP and attack, then you should be looking for double crit. There should be no exceptions here, and at least one more useful stat. So it could be double crit with attack percent and defense percent. That is perfectly fine. You got 3 out of the 4 useful already. For sands and circular, you should be looking for at least 1 crit, which means you should be looking for at least 1 crit rate or crit damage. And for sands, I will even argue if you can look for double crit. And if you're only looking for 1 crit, then you should have at least 2 more useful substats. The thing about circular is if you're already going with a crit circular, you're only going to roll into the other crit as a substat, because the artifact main stats and substats cannot be the same, which is why you're never going to see a crit damage helmet with crit damage and crit rate both as substats. Crit rate is the only possible substats to appear in terms of crit there. So with that said, if you are having a crit circular, then you are guaranteed to only have 1 crit, but you should have 2 more useful substats. For Goblet, again, same rule as before, just pick the best one you have. And in the transitional period, one thing to note is that artifacts stats are better than artifact set bonuses. The set bonus you should treat as a cherry on top. If you have it, you have it. If you don't have it, it's better to pick the correct artifacts with the better substats than the shitty artifacts with set bonuses. That's all I will say. So moving on to the amount of rows I would recommend for each one. For row, I mean every single 4 level you randomly upgrade an artifact. So the amount of upgrades you need to go into the correct substats for this one to be useful. For feathers and flowers, again, and even for goblets, because they're pretty common, and for goblets case it's kind of hard to control, but still, you have more options because it generally tends to be the off piece. For this one, you should roll at least 3 times into useful substats. For useful substats, I mean crit, attack, energy recharge, or elemental mastery. And for sand, you should look for at least 2 rows or 2 upgrades into the correct substat. For circular, you should look for 1 row in the correct substat, just because it is a pain to farm circular, especially you need either specific crit rate or crit damage. They're generally speaking not exchangeable, and on top of that, you need that one to roll into pretty good substats, which is very rare. And finally, just a bonus tip. I know a lot of people keep saying like, look, I have this crit, I have this HP percent stance or HP percent circular with perfect substats. It's actually more common to appear because the main stats is already bad, so for the substats you cannot roll that bad main stats, and because HP percent and defense percent occur the most frequent among artifacts, someone has done the math before through crowdsourcing. If you're interested, you can look it up. But defense percent and HP percent are most likely to appear both as main stats, and on top they are most likely to appear as substats when you roll for them, because that's how MiHoYo time gates us from finishing the game. So with that said, it is easy for that to happen. Just don't get pissed off. All you have to do is just come back and reroll. I mean, after all, there is almost no end to the artifact building game, so all I have to say is good luck with building your artifacts, and thank you very much for watching, and have a nice day.